that you have a child, and I know many of us have either had children or currently do have children, so there's really not much imagining when it comes to this perspective. But you have a child, and the first 4 or 5 years of its life, you raise it to be very healthy. You give it the proper food it needs, and it gets the kind of nutrition it needs to grow and to be healthy. Now, what would happen if you came up with the wise idea that for all of its meals, 3 meals a day, for an entire year, you're going to feed it nothing but Skittles? That baby wouldn't be healthy anymore, to say the least. Because Skittles, as my wife would say, is just sugar. That's all it is. And if you feed a baby sugar over and over and over again, it's not going to be healthy. And I bring this all up because we can look at people, look at their physical appearance, and see how healthy they are. You could look at pictures of me whenever I was in high school, junior, senior, and I actually looked good, and I played football and stuff. And you look at me now and says, "Oh, he's gotten a little bit unhealthier," But what I've come to realize whenever I've studied Titus chapter 2 is that when people see us, they can see how healthy our faith is. And when we look at Titus chapter 2, that's where we're going to be, we see 4 views of a healthy faith. In Titus chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. And when we read Titus chapter 2, verse number 1, which says, "But as for you, speak the things which are fitting for sound doctrine." Another word that could be translated in the place of sound is healthy. So Paul was telling Titus, this young preacher on this island by himself, who's trying to build up the church, who's trying to establish elders, who's trying to get the ball rolling in this case, that he needs to preach things that are healthy doctrine. And this is in contrast to chapter 1 of Titus, verses 6 through 10, in which Paul describes these false teachers and these deceivers that were evidently causing Titus a lot of trouble. And I'm sure if you would have asked that false teacher if their faith was healthy, they would say, "Yes, it is healthy, and I am teaching the things that are healthy," but they weren't. And so this is a complete contrast of chapter 1, verses 6 through 10. And so, what does a healthy faith look like? That's what we're going to be exploring this evening. And what each of us should understand is every last one of us can have a healthy faith. It doesn't matter who you are. You can have a healthy faith. And so, as I mentioned earlier, there's 4 views of a healthy faith in Titus chapter 2, verses 2 through 8. The first view of a healthy faith we have is the faith of older men. Notice Titus 2, verse 2. It says, "Older men are to be temperate, dignified, sensible, sound in faith, in love, and perseverance." So we see the idea of older men. This is a man that is mature both in his spirituality and in his age chronologically. So he's an older, he's got life experience, he's a mature man. And we have these qualities that he has. He's temperate. Some translations may read this as being sober-minded. This certainly carries the idea of self-control. Self-control is kind of a theme throughout here. But it's also the idea that this man is going to be serious about things which he should be serious about. He's also to be dignified. In other words, he is worthy of respect. He's worthy of honor. And this isn't something that's just handed to him. In a sense, he's earned his stripes. He's proven himself to be worthy of that. So a man that has healthy faith, he's worthy of respect. And then we also see that he is sensible. Pay close attention to this because this is going to appear at least 3 more times in Titus chapter 2 when we're studying this. And it's kind of a major theme in the book, the idea of being sensible. And like we said with temperate, sensible kind of carries the idea of self-control. But this is kind of self-control of oneself. This is the idea of being thoughtful, being prudent, being considerate of others. And then we see he's sound in faith and love and perseverance. So he's healthy in faith, love, and perseverance. And now our overall point here is how he has a healthy faith. And so a healthy faith is a faith that continues to grow, continues to increase. And what's that going to lead to? It's going to lead to a healthy love. You see, as my faith continues to grow and as it continues to increase, it's going to lead to me seeing people the way Jesus sees them and seeing a soul, and that's going to increase the love I have for them. And this is a love that continues to grow. And then continuing to be sound and perseverance, or healthy and perseverance, the ability to stand under when times are hard. And this certainly has an element of patience along with it. So patience, perseverance, all those things kind of go together in this word. But you see, what I've noticed as I studied this is we start off with, we got to have the healthy faith. But that healthy faith is going to lead to our health in love. And as we continue to grow in our love, that's going to lead to us being perseverance. We're going to be more patient. We're going to be able to deal with more difficult times. But it all starts with the healthy faith. So one leads to the other and leads to the other. And, when I think about the idea of a healthy faith, it reminds me of a preacher that I know from back home. And he's a man that is very, very patient, very, very loving as well. And he had a previous work where he was not very appreciative by the congregation. And there was a man that, I don't know what was wrong with the man. I don't know if he didn't like his sermons. I didn't know if the preacher was always just stepping on his toes in his lessons. I don't know what was going on. But this man ended up writing a 10-page paper of everything he did not like about this preacher. And you talk about waste of ink because that man's still preaching. But it takes a lot to detail out 10 pages of everything you don't like about someone. But so I want you to kind of put yourself there. I'm sure Joel's laughing over here, so I'm sure he's probably been there before. But that can be hard to deal with. Maybe our first response would be to be hateful, to go after them and start to point out all the things they're doing wrong. Okay, you want to talk about me? Well, you're not very involved in church. You don't show up all the time. You're not the one making visits all the time. But what did this man do? The man I'm talking about, he was patient with him. And he was loving. He invited him to his home. And he tried to sit down. He tried to work out what was wrong. And he wasn't pointing fingers. In anything, he was trying to quit the finger pointing. And to me, that's based on this passage, that's kind of describing a healthy faith. So, older men, do you have a healthy faith? Are you serious about things which you should be serious about? How about how your children are raised? Because it's very, very important that we start it in the home, how the Bible foundation that they should have for the rest of their life. How about are you serious about your relationship with your wife, both spiritually and emotionally? Are you serious about helping her get to heaven? Are you serious about your own faith? Are you someone worthy of respect? Do you act like the kind of man that God expects you to be? And this is very, very challenging. And I'm not here to discourage anyone because it can be easy for preachers can take a text like this and just go to town on members. But that's not what I'm here to do. I'm here to encourage you. I'm here to kind of show you what the healthy faith looks like and to see if we kind of match up with that. And I'm here to encourage you that you can get there if you're not there now. So when we look at a healthy faith for older men, we have our portrait in 2 verse 2. Do we match up to it? Our second view of a healthy faith is the faith of older women. Verse 3 says, older women likewise are to be reverent in their behavior, not malicious gossips, nor enslaved to much wine, teaching what is good. So now we're talking about older women. Likewise, as older men, they are mature in age, they're mature in their spirituality. And these are very godly women. And so we see that they are reverent in their behavior. In other words, they are pure in their behavior. And to kind of help us better understand this, there's a bit of a contrast in this verse. They're not malicious gossips, and they're not enslaved to much wine. So what that immediately tells us, without even really digging into those two terms, without really understanding what those terms mean, we understand that a pure behavior is the complete opposite of these things over here. Well, what is that? What is the idea of not being malicious gossips? Well, they don't slander other people. They don't try to put other people down. They don't try to tear people down. And gossip, it's a big deal, unfortunately, and it has a lot of damage it can do. And it can cause damage to an entire congregation. It can lead to a split. It can cause damage to other members, and it can cause damage to yourself. Because at the end of the day, even if you're not necessarily hurting the person that you're gossiping about, you're hurting yourself and you're hurting your own faith. You know, I went to lunch with a good friend of mine who travels all around churches in America, and I sat down with him and I asked him, what is a consistent issue that you see in the churches in America as a whole? And he said gossip. And that was very, very sad to hear. Because if there's gossip, then there's not unity. And it's not a godly conduct, not a pure behavior at all when gossip takes place. In fact, it's un-Christ-like. And then we also see that they're not enslaved to much wine. Much like what we saw with older men, there's an element of self-control. And self-control, it's going to be repetitive all through this passage. Self-control, 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 even if the exact words aren't used. They're not enslaved to much wine. In other words, they are able to control themselves. Something else is not controlling them. Wine is not controlling a woman, an older woman who has a healthy faith. But instead what we see is that they are to teach what is good. You know, when I think about passages like 1 Peter chapter 3, in which Peter was talking about how women should be reverent to their, should be submissive to their husbands, and in doing so, by their behavior, they can lead their husband back to the Lord should he decide to be disobedient to the word. Think about that kind of power and influence. A woman, a wife that is able to lead her husband back to the Lord, that is a pure behavior. And she does it without even saying anything. It's just the way she acts. And so ladies, your behavior is really, really powerful. It's probably more powerful than you may realize. You know, and I kind of think about Hayden. Sometimes, you know, Hayden can say something to me, and she will say it as nice as possible. And I think about it, and I say, oh, well, I need to make sure I don't do that again, you know. So, ladies, we have our portrait here. Again, what a healthy faith looks like for older women. And the question is, do you match up to it? And, you know, maybe in some cases, you're very strong on one point, but not as strong as you need to be on another point. And this is an encouragement for you to continue to work at it. And maybe it may take a reminder over and over to remind yourself of this passage. Maybe it's like writing a note or something on your bathroom mirror and like hanging it up there. That way you see it every morning. Okay, this is what it takes to have a healthy faith. Maybe it's something where you constantly look at it. Put it in your heart. What does it take for me to have a healthy faith? So this is the view of a healthy faith through an older woman. Our third view of a healthy faith is the faith of young women. Notice verse number 4. So that they, being the older women, may encourage the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be sensible, pure workers at home, kind, being subject to their husbands, so that the word of God will not be dishonored. So now we're talking about young women. And really, with all the stuff that we looked at with young women, I think it's fair to say that older women have that in their faith as well. If an older woman's going to be healthy in their faith, then they're going to have these same qualities that they're teaching the younger women. In other words, they practice what they preach. So if an older woman does not have these qualities, how can she teach a younger woman to have these? And if a younger woman does not have these things, how can they have a healthy faith? Okay, so we see that they are to love their husbands and to love their children. And these are qualities that are very much necessary. You know, they need to have an affection for their husbands, and they need to love their children as any mother would. And when a woman does that, you know, in God's eyes, that's a sign of a healthy faith. Now, there may be other women that do love their husbands and that do love their children that don't really have a healthy faith. I'm saying that this solely means you have a healthy faith. But what I am saying is that if you do this, ladies, it can show that you have a healthy faith. And then we also see that in verse number 5, they are to be sensible. There it is again. I told you to pay attention to it. Sensible, being thoughtful, considerate of others. And then they're to be pure. And the idea of pure is this lady is able to be used by God. And as I mentioned with 1 Peter chapter 3, God can use the pure behavior of women to lead a man back to Him. That's powerful. Ladies, are you able to be used by God? And then they are to be workers at home. And I don't think this necessarily means that the guy can just come home and just pop a squat on the couch and just do nothing and say, "Woman, cook me food." I have a feeling, guys, that, and I think everyone here knows, if you do that, you're not going to get very far. She's going to be very, very upset with you. And I haven't tried that with my wife, and I'm not going to. But what it does mean is that this lady is not lazy. She'll take care of the home. And likewise, it says that she's to be kind. So that's kind of self-explanatory. Kindness is a big part of a healthy faith. And then to being subject to their own husbands. And so, this can kind of get twisted around with society a little bit. But this is ultimately what God desires. God desires the man to be the leader and for the women to be up with him and to be subject to him. Now, it doesn't mean that we should be disrespectful, but husbands are also to love their wives. So it's almost as if it offsets itself. But women, in God's eyes, women that are subject to their husbands, that will go along with their husbands, that seems to point to a healthy faith. So women are to have a submissive attitude. But notice what all of this accomplishes. At the very end of the verse, verse number 5, so that the word of God will not be dishonored. A healthy faith by a young woman honors the word of God and honors God. But what does the opposite do? If a young woman does not have a healthy faith, if a young woman does not show herself to be an example of these kinds of qualities, then the Word of God is being dishonored and God is being dishonored. It shows that with ladies, and I think this certainly applies to men as well, so let's not single out just the ladies here, but our actions will either bring honor to God or they'll bring dishonor to God. And the kind of faith that we have will either bring honor to God or dishonor to God. And the behavior is very, very powerful. It's powerful with older women because they're going to teach the younger women. And it's powerful in younger women because one day they will teach older women, and people see that. People see the kind of behavior, the kind of faith that you have. They see it in your workplace. They see it in the home. When people get to know you, they know what kind of faith you have. Is it healthy? We have our portrait here of a healthy faith from a younger woman. And younger ladies, and I realize there's not as many here as there might be at other places, but do we have that? And older women, do we have a healthy faith? We see a view of a healthy faith through a young woman. And our fourth and final view of a healthy faith is the faith of young men. Verse 6, likewise, urge the young men to be sensible. There it is again, sensible. I told you it would be up 3 times in our text. This is a major thing. And notice the word urge. So this is urgent. There's a pleading element here. Please, young men, be sensible. Don't just be caring about yourself. Care about others. Be thoughtful of others. And, I can speak as a young man here. Many, many times I have not been nearly as sensible as I should be. Many times I've just kind of been wrapped up in my own world, only caring about myself, only looking out for myself. And it's caused a lot of problems before. For a while, the relationship I had with my dad was damaged because of my own selfishness and my failure to be thoughtful and to have some self-control. And there's been relationships that have been ruined to this day because I was not sensible. And so as I'm going through this text and I'm listening to all these qualities, I'm not there yet. But I'm working as hard as I can to get there. And that's what we all have got to do. And maybe you've noticed something where you're falling a tad bit shorter than what you should be. Don't be discouraged about it. We're here to work on it. That's why we come here together, to encourage each other to have a healthy faith. And I get encouragement here when I come here and I realize it's possible for me to be sensible and to have self-control and to be thoughtful of others. And then notice verse 7. It says, in all things show yourself to be an example of good deeds with purity and doctrine, dignified, sound in speech, which is beyond reproach, so that the opponent will be put to shame, having nothing bad to say about us. So now, it seems as though Paul is talking directly to Titus here, but what was Titus? He was a young man. So what it seems to me here is that the qualities listed in verses 7 and verse number 8 will fit for other young men as well. Other young men should be an example of good deeds. Other young men should demonstrate a purity in doctrine and should be dignified and sound in speech. So we're not just talking about simply Titus here. Oh, this applies to Titus and no one else. And we can't even say this just applies to young preachers and no one else. This seems to apply to all young men. And in a broader sense, it might be fair to say that this applies to all children of God as well. So let's take a look at these things. They are to be an example of good deeds. And there's kind of immediate application, of course, for my case, being a young preacher. Whenever I go work with a congregation, I shouldn't expect just all this respect and honor just because I preach, just because I can public speak. Okay? I need to show myself to practice the things that I preach and to work every day. And if members will see my hard work, then maybe they'll listen. But with other young men, this applies to you too. That you've got to earn your stripes. You've got to be able to work to show yourself worthy of respect. And if you're not an example of good deeds, you're not really going to accomplish that. And then we also see that he is purity in doctrine. As I mentioned earlier, this is in contrast to what we mentioned earlier in chapter 1 about the false teachers and the deceivers that were leading people astray. They had an impure doctrine. Young men don't. Young men with a healthy faith don't. And we also see that he's dignified, and that kind of relates right back to being an example of good deeds. If you're an example of good deeds, then you'll be worthy of respect and honor. And then he's also to be sound in speech or healthy in speech. This is very, very important. If I, as a Christian young man, am always using false language and always using speech that will tear people down, then I don't have a healthy faith. And so, what does all this accomplish? Well, the opponent will be put to shame, and they'll have nothing bad to say about us. So, by young men, by our conduct, by us having a healthy faith, then people really won't be able to tear down the church. Now, they can lie about stuff. They did that with Stephen in Acts chapter 7. In Acts chapter 6, they lied about stuff he was doing because it seems as though he may have been a young man that demonstrated these qualities and was teaching, was kind of teaching them what they should have been doing and teaching about Jesus and the Christ. So people may be able to lie about us, but they won't be able to bring any legitimate complaint against us. And that's pretty powerful. As a young man, I look at this and I see I'm not there yet. But I see that I can get there. And that's kind of the entire point of all of this, is for us to understand what it looks like and how we can get there. And so my encouragement to you tonight is continue to study this passage and continue to look at it and say, okay, here's what I need to do to have a healthy faith. Any new Christian starting out doesn't have any of these. They might be strong, they might be dignified, especially if it's an older man that's spent their life working hard and providing for their families. But they may not be as sensible as they should be. That kind of thing. And even the older Christians may not have all these qualities, but I'm not here, again, to beat anyone down. I'm here to encourage you to work for these kinds of qualities. Because when you have a healthy faith, you have a healthy relationship with the Lord. And if you have a healthy relationship with the Lord, you can know that you're pleasing to Him. And so, everyone at this time, ask yourselves, do I have a healthy faith? And it may help to kind of write down areas where you need a tad bit more work on. And then continue to look at it. Continue to strive to have the healthy faith. In other words, it may take a little bit of elbow grease, if you will, to kind of get there, especially if it's kind of something that's not natural to you. Maybe it's not natural for me to always be sensible, so I have to work at it to get there. Maybe we all have to work at it a little bit, but every last one of us can get there. And maybe tonight you realize that you're not there, and you want the prayers of the church. That is why we come together. That's one of the many things we do to come together. We share a common love with each other and with the Lord. And if you're struggling right now, we don't want you going about it by yourself. So if you realize your faith is not where it needs to be, or you realize that you're struggling and your relationship with God has been damaged to an extent, if there's any need you have now, come forward now as we stand and sing.